Hi students, this is going to be our final lecture. The title is Todayish, and I want to preface this lecture by talking about how we deal with this term contemporary, and it gets used in thinking about contemporary art. And the idea for the use and understanding of that term is to realize that we're unable, and probably it'd be irresponsible to kind of organize and categorize and theorize on things that are happening currently or right now. So we always need to give ourselves a little bit of space from what's happening in order to assess and analyze and come to some more appropriate conclusions to what might be going on. And so in this sense, when I talk about Todayish, I'm talking about kind of a near period of time, and specifically though in this lecture I want to kind of think about where we've been with some of the lectures and ideas in the course and try to figure out how maybe what's been happening recently into now is a slight shift in thought and beliefs, or thought or beliefs or ideologies that are trying to shift towards something more constructive. And so we've been looking at a lot of criticism and a lot of ways of pointing out maybe what's wrong or what people think is wrong through the vehicle of representation and art making. But there often is a struggle to see and come to conclusions or solutions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about maybe where you might encounter artworks that are actually shifting toward solutions or some other way of approaching criticism, because postmodernism, as we've talked of late, is very much a critical stance, but specifically in the stance of criticism or pointing out what's failing. And so keep that in mind as we go through this lecture. So postmodernism, or this kind of no neutral place to stand, is where we've jumped off from. And we got here, generally we began this half of the semester with modern art, or modernist art, in the period of modernism, and this included our conversations around Pollock, that should say, and Rothko, including some minimalism as an extension to that. We didn't go too heavily in depth there, but we did talk a lot about abstraction. And so from there we looked at a lot of subversions or subversive methods that were coming about and critiques of modern art. And so that began with Duchamp, but it started to gain traction with some of Rauschenberg's work. He's the Erase de Kooning, and the all blank, the all whites canvases. Warhol fits into this category, and we moved into kind of conceptualism and performance art and so on, up until we get to this lecture. So you get many critiques of modernist art and deviations from it, and so for the lack of a better term, we've been using postmodernism and keeping a time frame of 60s to 90s as an overarching umbrella to capture that, these disparate bodies of work. So the term postmodernism includes different things on a more broad cultural basis, such as postmodernism in philosophy, sociology, and politics. If we had to summarize it briefly, though, all postmodern thought and artwork has a common tendency to directly attack claims of totality, finality, authoritative explanations or narratives that try to explain the world as a, in finite or total terms, universal terms. Sometimes we use the word meta-narrative here. So that idea of the critical versus the constructive is something I want to tease out here. So how and why? First, postmodernism is going to emphasize the ways that we're embedded in culture, historically, and these linguistic situations. So you don't just think on your own. Your identity doesn't just come from the womb. We're all significantly formed, or the term we've been talking about a lot is conditioned. What we think about, what we value, our patterns and routines in lives, and are considerably embedded in a historical, cultural situation. Postmodern thought and postmodern art is going to show how culturally relative a lot of what you think and what you value is. So this attacks most notions of objectivity, truth, originality, utopic solutions, sincerity, and ideas of authenticity or authentic expression. It would say, don't be so naive to think that your authentic expression isn't based on all sorts of things like the television that you watch, or we're quick to conclude that you might you're right about this or that or what you know. Postmodernism is going to critique the ways you arrive at certain certainties and conclusions with the assertion that there's no neutrality, there's no neutral stance. The root of postmodernism is this assertion that there's no neutral place to stand. There's no neutral place from which you can do philosophy, no neutral place from which you can make art or practice in the market or whatever. Everything is already laden with values and laden with assumptions. But why? What's motivating this position? Postmodern thought points to the idea that claims to totality have the greatest potential for oppressing people. You're never so dangerous as when you think you're absolutely right, is the idea here. So this is at its core an ethical revolt, an attempt to give voice to those run over in the process. Again, postmodern thought will attack power structures, point out inequities, etc. And so you can see that postmodernity or postmodernism didn't just go away. We're still grappling with some of these same themes and ideas in our lives today. Right? So examples that we brought up, how women are marginalized by traditional philosophy and traditional art, or how minorities and ethnic minorities are marginalized and oppressed by traditional conversations. Now, we've talked about this idea of Western art and the Western canon as being dominant, and so a lot of postmodern thought and art is going to critique and hack away at this Western thought. So in our conversation around Pollock, a lot of those dialogues are going to be heavily attacked by postmodern thought. Specifically because, Greenberg is a good character for this. He was very dualistic in thinking that there's a right and a wrong. He's a purist, right? And so that purity of position is going to be attacked pretty heavily here. I'm gonna keep moving into some work now. So Mel Bachner, right, is a conceptual artist who, in 1969, this work is called "Language is Not Transparent." And so through this visual representation of language, so he's making a picture of language, he's showing this the lack of transparency that language has. It has the ability to really mask or deceive or manipulate information. or Lawrence Weiner, As Far as the Eye Can See from 1968. I think I brought this up maybe briefly already, but the idea of what you're looking at here, as far as the eye can see, is text, and the language you're reading is telling you one thing, but the actual representation, the image, is restricting that. It's the opposite. You're confronted with a wall, and you can't see as far as the eye can see. And so there's a contradiction embedded in the what you're seeing and what you know. Jenny Holzer is an artist who will use these language and these large signs, digital signs. This one in Times Square. So 1985, 1986, called Truisms. These are part of a larger series, and this is Protect Me From What I Want. So it's a kind of attack on commerce and our notions and assumptions of what's real or true. Ed Ruscha, The Back of Hollywood, 1977, right? And so that idea of pulling back the curtain, showing us or revealing to us what's not always visible or talked about or discussed. And so the front of the Hollywood sign is what we often represent and idolize, but the back side is something that also is worthy of being pictured. This is him as well. I'll skip along. You start to see artists who are doing pretty radical art practices as well, challenging some of these ideas. This is an artist named Anquara. These are deep paintings. He does a lot of different really interesting work like this. This revolves around the daily labor of making art. So in these paintings, what he does is he meticulously makes these paintings on canvas that almost obliterate the human hand, so you can't really see any brushstrokes or anything like that. They become very technical, very graphic, almost machine-made in appearance. But he does them every day, and he clocks in like he would in a work day, and he makes a date painting of that date. And if he doesn't finish the painting to the standard that he's set, the criteria he's set, he destroys it. And often they're displayed or presented with a box or a case that they come in that has a cover or an insert of that date's newspaper to prove its authenticity in terms of when it was made. What's interesting about Anquara is he does works like this, these very tedious and long projects over time, and he is someone who is also semi-anonymous in terms of our knowledge of who he is or where he works, even, because he will send these paintings in the mail to a gallery that then represents them and deals with them. And he often, his projects revolve around him being isolated and lacking that kind of interaction and social interaction and relational interaction that many artists have with their gallerist or with their public or with the audience in general. So go ahead and watch this little clip on Anquara. They're really, really pretty fascinating. This is similar. This is a gentleman, a Polish gentleman named Roman Opalka. From 1965 to present. I think he died a couple years back, but in 1972 he decided he would gradually, what you're looking at in this image on the left over here is a canvas, and this canvas is the exact dimension of the door to his studio. And so he's utilizing that door as a format, which is kind of a body size representation object to kind of connote or point to scale in terms of the body's reference. And so what he does is he started with 1 and has been writing on these canvases a succession of numbers from 1 to infinity. And in 1972, he decided he would gradually lighten this gray background that he'd been working on by adding 1% more white to the ground with each passing detail. So he expected that he would be painting virtually in white on white by the time he reached 7,777,777, which is pretty goofy. Anyway, he also, if you ever look up YouTube videos, at a certain point started recording himself saying the numbers as he was writing them. And so he made an entire practice and career out of making these date paintings, or number paintings. This gets into that kind of category of marginalized or minority voices are marginalized. This would be Cindy Sherman, who starts to make works that reappropriate or reconstruct paintings and the way women are represented specifically in paintings. She starts to really take up the ideas around feminist theory, where the women and the woman's body and representation is seen as something that is often dismembered or seen in parts and pieces. And I'm trying to remember the term right off the top of my head. I can't believe I forgot that. Anyway, the general gist there, though, is that the way that woman's body is never seen as a whole, and in general, that's a violent thought, or the image is then representing violence as it depicts the woman's body. So another political stance here, social political stance, Fred Wilson. This is called Mining the Museum. The artist was invited to be a kind of artist in residence and to utilize the museum as a source for making work. This is in 1992, and so he's going through this museum and looking at the metalworks and pointing out what's missing in that kind of time period. So you see representations of kind of class and wealth by the lavish metalworks here that were created for, wealthy people. In this case, often slave owners, plantation owners, people who trafficked in humans, right? And so he inserts into the museum displays shackles and chains that were used in the slave trade. And so this then becomes a much more complex understanding of metalworks. We talked about Andy Warhol, right? Andy Warhol, I think you could characterize and even in that sense complicate some of the work of Cindy Sherman. Jeff Koons is one of the videos that I asked you to watch. This one's called Pink Panther. He's often complicating these kind of social representations and how images create seduction and desire, in specifically in relationship to commodities and objects that we consume or purchase. Jeff Koons' Sacred Heart, right, which looks kind of like one of those generic sacred or Valentine's Day gifts with, chocolate inside. What's amazing about this, by the way, if it's not clear, this is a very large sculpture, and he's often making it reflective, so you see yourself looking at it, so you're reflected in the object itself, but they're also they're so well crafted that they look like the kind of plastic that they are in our daily lives, but these are large aluminum structures. This is John Baldessari, again, kind of deconstructing culture, popular culture. This gets a little more current. This is Tom Friedman. This is Untitled Dollar Bill. So what we're looking at is detail. So he's taken a certain amount of dollars and folded and cut them or pasted them together and constructing this larger dollar bill. And you'll see in some of his work, through this repetition, the more that you have, the less in focus things are. So it becomes kind of a way of analyzing wealth or analyzing that kind of consumption. I think he constructs a larger scale total box out of many regular sized total boxes. Total being a key word that he's manipulating and playing with in terms of postmodernity, totality, all those kind of things that we've been talking about. He's very aware of that discourse. This is a really interesting piece by an artist named Chris Martin called Vase in 2005. It's a work in which the artist smashes a 225 centimeter tall blue and white Chinese porcelain vase and glues it back together every time the work is exhibited. The vase, currently in thousands of pieces, becomes increasingly fragmented and fragile while each cycle of its destruction and resurrection, even as its perceived value increases with the prestige conferred by the exposure of each additional exhibition. So what that essentially means is every time he destroys and pieces back the vase itself, as if you were going to buy it as a regular vase for, decorative functions, is devalued because it's broken and slowly is crumbling and unable to hold its structure over time, because eventually, the shards will be harder and harder to put together. As he's exhibiting it, though, and redoing this each time, the value as an artwork, or the object as an artwork, becomes more valuable and increases in value because it's exhibited more, becomes more popular, ... So it's this real contradiction. This is TYFFMF, and thank you for flying, Mark Fox. There's some references here. This was shown actually at the MCA in Chicago a few years back, but you're looking at a hot air balloon that is fallen over, isn't functioning. It's almost absurd to have it as a object indoors, right? Which is again a kind of criticism or contemporary critique of some of the images that are tethered to innovation and modernity, like flight. It's him again. We talked about this in terms of Greenberg, the new Laocoon. He's making a cheap 3D print knockoff of the new Laocoon as a nod to that standard. We talked about Gabriel Roscoe and his empty shoebox sum, and Ben Lewis's critique of that, right, in those 2 points. Duchamp. Joseph Kosuth is the one in three chairs. He says, the event that made conceivable the realization that it was possible to speak another language and still make sense in art was Marcel Duchamp's first unassisted ready-made. This change, one from appearance to conception, was the beginning of modern art and the beginning of conceptual art. So Duchamp exhibits an object that interrupts and complicates our expectations of what the exhibition or museum or gallery is supposed to do. He interrupts it through an attack on craftsmanship. He doesn't make it himself. He conveys meaning. It conveys meaning, but there's no narrative. Like where we be, and it's not really beautiful. That's not really the point. And he argues that it is artwork because he signs it. Does art only become art? So we talked about this when it's exhibited. What about when it's in storage, not being appreciated, contemplated? How far can Duchamp push what it is we think art is? Art is not defined by what the thing is, but by what it's doing. These are all things that, again, we've talked about. So this brings us to this kind of relational idea. And you can go ahead and watch this video on Oliver Elias, and it's a short interview, but I really like his read on the idea that art is about making sense of the world, and a lot of his work is trying to tease out that phenomenological idea of making sense. So when I proactively make sense, he says, I am looking to the world to help me understand it, but myself within it, and all the phenomenon along with that. So moving past postmodernism, though, and this the idea of critical cynicism or irony that is often used in this type of work, we might be seeing some shifts towards something more constructive, like questioning postmodernism. It not be the fact that it might not be very healthy for us as individuals. Like there's no affirmations. It's maybe not the healthiest way to live in terms of what brings us joy or insights that better us in a lot of ways. Not to say that the truth doesn't better us, maybe, or the reveal, but the where is that then what? What do we do with that reveal? What's the kind of making sense of that do for us? So it also is like interesting to see maybe lately more resurgence in the idea of her representing or talking or making work that wants to think about human virtues like love, beauty, generosity, hospitality, sincerity. Those are all kind of condemned words in postmodern art because they seem to be distractions or some not productive. So we see some terms that are trying to become maybe categories for what we might be seeing when people are thinking some of these thoughts. So hypermodern, pseudo-modernism, modernism, meta-modernism, new sincerity. These are some of the terms that come about. So they all share a common desire for there to be a place for some of these other ideas. And so some more current things, though, that are really challenging for us, right? So when we get to maybe a place of just representing what is or how things are, this is Martin Creed, work number 227. The lights going on and off. That's it. So when you walk into space, you're witness and experience the lights turning on and off. This is really nice work by Simon Starling called Autoxylocryptochloroborus from 2005. I don't know if I wrote anything there. There is some context here if you want to research it a little bit more, but it's a specific lake where there's a boat that had sunk that had some significance, especially in terms of modernism. And so what you're looking at is the artist and a collaborator who, in this kind of Looney Tunes or cartoonish way, they have a steam engine as part of the boat that propels the motor of the boat, and they need fuel to push or to operate the steam engine. So they slowly cut apart the boat as they travel across this river and feed it into the engine until they eventually sink. So that's kind of that absurdist view. So work by him as well that's pretty fascinating in this artwork. He was asked to exhibit in the museum, and he did a project where he found this shed that holds boats along the river that was outside of this museum. And so for this project he deconstructed this shed. In the deconstruction of the shed, he used the material of the shed to create the boat, right? So this boat is made out of the shed and the other materials like the roofing and stuff like that. He carried and used the boat to transport all the material, and then he rebuilt the shed. So it's called Shed Boat Shed. We talked about Doris Salcedo. Here's some other images there. The art world is expanding beyond this Western art world, so we're seeing a lot of art biennales or biennials happening around the world that represent this kind of globalist or kind of multicultural perspective. This is at the Tate Modern in Turbine Hall. Is this main space in this turbine factory that was turned into a contemporary art museum. Artists are asked to exhibit large-scale works in this hall, in this turbine hall, which is very large. And what she proposed was to install a literal crack in the foundation, right, which is a metaphor. And then when the exhibit was over, the crack was sealed, but in a lot of ways looks like a scar. This is a local artist, actually. He teaches at the University of Chicago. His name's Jason Sullivan. He creates computer software, and he manipulates data that he aggregates, right? And so in this artwork that you're seeing on the left, he calls them visual amalgamations. This is 100 special moments. So this is Kids with Santa. And so he's creating a single image out of 100 images sourced online of kids with Santa Claus. So that again, that kind of blurriness, you can kind of encapsulate and get a sense of what it's representing, but there's such a kind of generic way that these images are made and framed that they hold some of the form but not the clarity. And he does this again and again. So this is a TED Talk that he gives. Now, again, to kind of summarize a little bit, we're in this kind of phase of art, and I want you to take away from this lecture, but the class more broadly, this sense that you have an engagement with art and culture more broadly, but art in this visual art, in the case that we're talking about, in the subject of the course, where you are witnessing a kind of fractioning that's been happening for a century or more, where we are seeking out and trying to determine what it is that visual representation and art does, right? What's it give insight to? And a lot of what we teased out is this kind of heavy debate amongst artists and those acting on behalf of a historical tradition of art making or art criticism or art history, where there is a investment in understanding the role that art plays in our lives. And is it there to talk about itself? Is it there to criticize and be insular and think only about art and for art's sake? Or is it there in order to enhance or give us insight into our broader notions of life and meaning and philosophy and blah 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 blah, politics? And so I think that it is partially up to us, although we don't have always the power to determine what gets presented to us, but we do have a lot of power in terms of what we consume, and being willing to and open to understanding or interrogating what we consume is, I think, vital to not being misled or manipulated into thinking or doing or understanding the world in terms that may not always be right or true. And so I know that's pretty heavy. It's a heavy thought, but I do think I'd like you to question what it is maybe your goals are in understanding art or making art or consuming art, because it's often tethered to some form of conditioning or some kind of assumption as to why you should care. And I think it's important to come to terms yourself with why you care, what you intend to gain from an engagement in what art might have to offer, and feeling as though you have some autonomy and some agency over determining what those are on your terms is important. And this course and your own desire to seek out your own education, either beyond this course or individually or independently, it's important to feel as though you are capable of formulating your own thoughts and your own beliefs around that. So anyway, I hope on some level, albeit this was an odd semester, you're able to feel empowered to do and believe some of those aspects of engaging visual culture. So that's about it. Okay, thank you.